Thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lance. I'm the sample manager product specialist here at LabKey. Today we're going to be discussing a new feature we introduced late last year, calculated columns, and how they pair well with conditional formatting to help improve data quality in the lab. So if you like what you see here today, reach out to your account manager and we'd be more than happy to help out. So let's start with something that's pretty common in the lab, tracking when samples expire or outdate for testing. Instead of relying on a manually calculated expiration date, we can use calculated columns that take the collection date and adds the correct number of days based off of the sample type, test kit being used, or analyte. In this example, we have it so when samples outdate, they're going to be highlighted in red, and then when samples will be outdating in 2 months, they'll be highlighted in yellow. Samples that have longer will not be highlighted. So to do this, we use this formula here on this slide, where everything in green is what I'd replace with information from my own data set. In this specific example, I have it so serum sample types will expire from 5 months from the collection date, but if I have a plasma sample type, it's going to be expiring in 2 months from the collection date. Of course, these calculations can be a lot more complex depending on what your needs are. You could easily pull the testing package inserts and set up the calculated columns from when your samples will outdate. And this example from the Ultra Elite Assay package insert, you can take in consideration if the samples are being refrigerated, if they've been centrifuged, frozen, and the different types of samples that there are to make sure you're not using outdated samples. I can add more calculations to this to make it more clear on how many months or days I have to use that sample before it outdates, rather than just having to rely on looking at that specific date. The formula we use is really similar to the one we saw previously, but I'm going to be adding an age in months. And this is where I'm taking that time that we're calculating for the sample to outdate, but we're subtracting it from today's date or the current date. This is going to give us this -1 month, 0 months, 1 month format. And we can see here that it's going to automatically highlight samples that are expired in red and those that are coming up in yellow. So this reduces risks and helps labs avoid using compromised materials. Another example is when I'm using an OR argument for my calculated fields. This first takes the requirements we need for an argument to be true, and then follows up with the results we'd expect if either of those arguments are true. For instance, I can take uh, this kind of format here where if my patient has not consented for treatment, or if their consent form has expired after a year of it being collected, then I need to mark this patient as having no consent. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave this field empty. This way, it becomes more clear to see when a patient does not give consent before I'd have to individually check these different fields. But now that they're in this single column, I just have the singular source of truth. We can see how that might be really useful with patient 15. If I'm just looking at this consented field, I might think that they did consent for treatment, and maybe I read this expiration date incorrectly. But now that it's highlighted in red and it just says no consent in this one field, super easy to make sure we're not using samples we shouldn't be using. But I always think the real power with all of our data and how it's stored is how easily you can search through your data and kind of query it. For calculations on the sample level, it's really easy to use your sample grid and filter through these different columns. In this example, I saved a view of all samples that have an outdate in less than 2 months and are marked as available. Here I can see I actually have some samples that have expired that are still available, so I should go through and discard of them or lock them. And then I also have some samples that are going to be coming up soon that I should probably be using. If I want to look through all my samples with characteristics from my sources or my assays, I can use Sample Finder. In this example, I'm looking for all my samples that came up from a patient that has not consented. That way I can lock them or dispose of them. For both of these different types of searches, I can save these queries and carry out this action over and over again without having to apply those filters every single time to make it a lot easier to kind of go through everything. Now, these were just a couple of scenarios of how you can use your calculated columns in conditional formatting, but there's still so much more you can do with these. I hope you saw how calculated columns lets us build rules directly into our data set, how conditional formatting makes issues visible at a glance, and together they create a proactive quality control layer that scales with your data. I'd really encourage you to think about where your team spends time double checking your data or where mistakes may be being made. those might be great places to try calculated fields. If you'd like to meet and chat more about these to your specific use case, we'd be more than happy to schedule some time with you, so reach out to your account manager.